Now, let's have a closer look at the mixing of a scalar. In this vessel, we have two miscible liquids, one floating on top of the other. If we leave them for a week or so, molecular diffusion will do a fair job of mixing them. Much more thorough mixing can be accomplished in less than a minute if we make the fluid turbulent. In this case, too, the end result is intimate mingling on a molecular scale, although the turbulent motions themselves are not much smaller than about a millimeter. The role of the turbulence is to make the inhomogeneities more vulnerable to the effects of molecular diffusion. Perhaps this can be clarified by animation. Let us suppose we have a blob of something which we plan to mix into the surrounding fluid. If the fluid is turbulent, the irregular motion will result in a strain, which will pull out the blob into a greatly elongated form like this. In turbulence, there is a great range of different scales of motion. At the same time as the blob is being pulled out, smaller scales are distorting it. And smaller scales still produce an even finer grain structure. Eventually, the interfacial area becomes so large and the property gradient so steep that molecular diffusion is able to act quickly and produce efficient mixing. In reality, of course, all the events we saw sequentially occur simultaneously. One of the curious properties of turbulence is the fact that although the Reynolds number is very important in determining whether or not a particular flow will be turbulent, once it is turbulent, the value of the Reynolds number is of very little importance as far as the large-scale motion is concerned. These two jets look pretty much the same. On the large scale, a turbulent jet is a turbulent jet, period. However, if we turn our attention to the small-scale motions, as seen in these shadow graphs, the effect of the Reynolds number is pretty clear. Notice how much finer grained is the structure in the higher Reynolds number jet. The reason for this can be understood if we consider the energy dissipated. In these two jets, the Reynolds number difference is produced by having different viscosities. All other conditions are the same, including the energy input into the jet. Therefore, the two jets dissipate energy at the same rate. Now, energy dissipation in a Newtonian fluid is given by the viscosity multiplied by the mean square of the strain rate. Dimensionally, viscosity multiplied by the speed squared divided by some characteristic length squared. This can be written. In the two jets, we have the same energy dissipation and the same characteristic speed, but have different viscosities. Therefore, the length scales must also differ. The high Reynolds number jet with low viscosity must correspondingly have a smaller characteristic length scale. This leads us to one of the most important concepts in the study of turbulence, the idea of the energy cascade. As we have seen, under certain circumstances, a large-scale motion can become turbulent. Some of the energy in the large-scale motion is converted into turbulent energy. The largest scales of the turbulence are usually smaller than, although comparable with, the scale of the basic mean flow. However, usually these large-scale motions are themselves unstable and break into smaller scale motions which take energy from them. Finally, the energy passes down to scales, like those revealed by this shadow graph, which are so small that the Reynolds number is too low for instability. The energy is dissipated by the action of viscosity. The analogy with a cascade of water is a useful one. Here, the only property of the flow at the top, which matters at the bottom, is the rate at which water passes down the cascade. Similarly, in the turbulent energy cascade, at the smaller scales of motion, it is only the rate of energy dissipation which is of any consequence. This rate, together with the viscosity, determines the size of the smallest scales of motion. At high enough Reynolds number, the small-scale turbulence loses all directional orientation. It becomes isotropic. Figuratively, it doesn't know which way is up. Further, at small scales, the turbulent structure ceases to depend upon the nature of the large-scale flow. Macroscopically, the difference between a jet and a channel flow is marked, but on a small enough scale, as revealed by the shadow graphs, the difference in structure disappears. Because of the size difference, the similarity between the small-scale structures may be somewhat obscured. Let's change the enlargement of the channel flow. Now, they're nearly indistinguishable. This is what we mean by similarity. Similar structure despite differences in scale. Thus we find that there is a locally isotropic regime at the small-scale end of the energy cascade, which is similar for all kinds of turbulence. We have already seen that the large-scale motion does not depend upon the Reynolds number. What the Reynolds number does is to determine the size ratio of the largest scales to the smallest scales of the turbulent motion. Knowledge of this behavior of turbulence provides a useful exercise in trying to outwit the movie studios. Frequently, they prefer to burn down a model rather than a full-scale set. Now, as we have seen, this deception is fairly effective because the difference in Reynolds number, which is the only major difference between model and full scale, is not apparent in the large-scale motion. The difference lies in the small scales. One of these scenes is phony. Just look at the small-scale motions and then make up your own mind which is which.